What if I told you that the fiercest warriors of the Viking Age weren't just swinging axes, they were falling into scandalous, passionate, and absolutely forbidden love affairs that could start blood feuds, collapse alliances, and end in public executions? Forget what you've seen in Hollywood. Viking love wasn't all arranged marriages and obedient wives waiting in longhouses. Behind the beards and battle cries were shield maidens disguising themselves as men just to sail with their lovers, queens accused of adultery for choosing passion over politics, and Christian monks trembling under the touch of Norse priestesses. These people risked everything for a single kiss. Sometimes they won, often they burned. And here's the wild part. Their stories didn't just disappear in the mists of time. They reshaped medieval storytelling across Europe. These were love affairs that broke Viking laws, shattered bloodlines, and still managed to be carved into runestones. Some ended in honor killings, others in runaway love across frozen seas. But all of them teach us one thing: love, when it's real, has never followed the rules. This is not a romantic fairy tale. This is the raw, myth-soaked, sensual history of what happens when desire dares to clash with duty. And trust me, you've never heard Viking love stories like these before. Arranged marriages in the Viking Age were more than family decisions. They were political chess moves, deals inked with blood and gold. A jarl's daughter wasn't free to marry for love. She was bound to serve her clan. Yet, amid the clinking of goblets and the weight of tradition, hearts still burned. There was Solveig, promised to an aging merchant, but secretly slipping into the woods to meet Leif, a farmer's son. These were not mere flings. They were rebellions whispered in the dark. One love letter tucked in a cloak could unravel a treaty. And just like that, love became treason. You might imagine that these lovers simply ran off into the fjords and lived happily ever after. But no, things rarely went so smoothly. When a woman defied her arranged match, her clan saw more than a broken promise. They saw weakness, betrayal. Sometimes, the woman was publicly shamed, her hair shorn, her honor torn, yet they still risked it, because some hearts refused to kneel, even to Viking laws. Think of Brynhild, who drank a love potion brewed by a seer to escape her fate, her story still carved in rune stones, her name whispered with both shame and awe. These forbidden romances carried the scent of pine forests, smoke from longhouses, and stolen kisses under stars. The tension between duty and desire wasn't just emotional, it was economic, spiritual, even bloody. Clan leaders weren't above using love as bait or revenge. One broken engagement could start a feud lasting generations, and yet the heart always found a crack in the fortress, a feast, a glance, a shared song. These were sparks that lit infernos. No wonder medieval storytelling is packed with such affairs. The more forbidden the love, the more immortal the tale. Lovers became legends, not because they obeyed, but because they dared. Their stories remind us, rules can build a world, but passion remakes it. Even now, in a world without mead halls or shield maidens, how often do we still see people shackled by what's expected of them? Think of someone staying in a job, a relationship, a life, simply because it was arranged. Now imagine the fire it takes to defy that, to write your own saga. That's what these Viking lovers did. They didn't just fall in love, they fought for it. And in that fight, others would follow, especially those who weren't even born free, but still believed they had a right to love. It happened in the shadows, between stone walls and animal skin partitions, in quiet corners of longhouses where no one dared look too closely. Slaves and free-born Vikings weren't supposed to touch, let alone fall in love, but they did in secret, with glances like stolen fire and whispers heavy with risk. Imagine a thrall named Eirik, strong and silent, and Astrid, daughter of a blacksmith. She taught him to read runes at night while her family slept. Their love had no rights, no protection under Viking laws, yet it bloomed like moss on ancient stones, hidden, persistent, beautiful. To be a slave in the Viking Age wasn't always a mark of the weakness. Some were captured warriors, others were debtors or victims of betrayal, and among them, stories of forbidden romance flared like the northern lights. Sometimes, the freeborn would grant freedom to their secret lovers, risking everything. In rare cases, those relationships changed lives, but more often, discovery meant brutal punishment for the slave, flogging, or worse, for the freeborn, public shame, exile, or loss of property. And still, people chose love, chose to feel, to connect, even with danger, in every heartbeat. We often forget how complex human hearts are, how they reach beyond rank or status. And let's be honest, some of these freeborn lovers weren't saints. Some relationships were abusive, veiled in coercion, but in the heart of this darkness, some shone with true emotion. There were tales of secret handfastings done in forests, of lovers burying runestones with their initials to bind their spirits together. These weren't just affairs, they were quiet revolutions. Imagine the courage of a woman who risked her father's wrath just to pass her lover a loaf of stolen bread. There's something profoundly human about choosing love where it's forbidden. In a world so structured by hierarchy, these bonds blurred the lines. Even now, we see echoes in workplace romances between manager and employee. In cultures where caste or class still separates hearts, history doesn't repeat, it rhymes. That tension between freedom and desire, legality and longing, hasn't gone away. It just wears modern clothes. And those who loved to cross lines back then, they left behind not laws, but legends, the kind passed from lips to firelight, unrecorded but unforgettable. And some of those legends spoke of priestesses and warriors, meeting not by accident, but by prophecy. It was said that the gods chose priestesses, not men. They were vessels of divine will, keepers of secrets whispered by seers, and guardians of sacred groves, untouchable, unmarried, unclaimed. But then came the warriors, loud, scarred, alive with the scent of blood and sweat, and suddenly the sacred was shaken. When a warrior locked eyes with a priestess across the midsummer fire, it wasn't just desire that sparked. It was war between two worlds. The clash between brute strength and spiritual power was electric and irresistible. Take the tale of Ragna, a priestess of Freya, who anointed sacred stones with honey and fire. She met Halvard, a berserker freshly returned from a raid. He asked her, half joking, to bless his axe. She refused. The next night, he asked her again, but with reverence. She touched the blade, and him. That moment was the beginning of a liaison hidden behind temple walls and old oaths in the eyes of the gods. Who knows what it meant? In the eyes of the clans, though, it was blasphemy. A woman of prophecy falling for a man of blood. It threatened the very balance of power. These weren't just love stories. They were fire kindled in sacred halls. Priestesses held sway over births, blessings, and the fates of warriors before battle. To love one was to wield dangerous influence. That's why such affairs were kept under layers of smoke and silence. Some priestesses used sorcery to cloak their trysts, love spells woven into hair ribbons, protection charms buried under bedposts. Others turned to seers, hoping to change fate. But fate doesn't bend easily. When these liaisons were uncovered, the punishment wasn't just exile. Sometimes it was sacrifice. Yes, blood on stone to appease the gods. Yet not even that fear could silence the heart. Isn't it always that way? When we're told, you must not, something deep inside stirs and says, but I already have. These stories aren't just about Vikings. They reflect every time you've felt torn between what's sacred and what you crave, between devotion to something larger than yourself and the aching pull of someone you can't forget. In a way, we all carry the tension of priestesses and warriors, of choosing between peace and passion, between vows and the wild beating of your heart. And when that choice came, sometimes passion won, but it always came at a cost measured not in silver or land, but in loyalty to clan. duty was everything in the Viking world. It was the air you breathed, the name you carried, the blood that sealed your fate. You didn't just belong to yourself, you belonged to your clan, and that meant honor above emotion, loyalty above longing. But what happens when your heart beats out of rhythm with your duty? That's when sagas are born, like when Ingrid, sworn to marry a nobleman her father owed allegiance to, fell in love with a rival clan's son during a Thing assembly. One kiss, and the weight of 10 generations pressed down on her chest. This wasn't just love, it was rebellion. In Viking culture, breaking with your clan could mean death or exile. To love outside your bloodline, your allegiance, your oath, meant risking not just your life, but everyone's. Imagine being the reason a treaty fell apart or a blood feud erupted. Still, people chose it, not out of foolishness, but because some passions refuse to stay buried beneath duty. Some lovers tried to hide, some lied, some married their duty, but kept their love in secret places, forest cabins, temple ruins, or even the enemy's hall. Each choice was a gamble, and oh, how the clans reacted. There were cases where lovers were stripped of everything, titles, land, even their names. Public shaming wasn't uncommon. Some were made examples of, hung in the square, or cast out into winter. Others, they triggered small wars, broken alliances, turned to bloody battles. Fathers killed sons, brothers swore vengeance, but love somehow kept surviving all that, like the story of Torsten and Asa, told in 3 villages with 3 endings. In one, they died together, in another, they disappeared over the sea, and in the third, they returned, older, but still together. What makes these stories powerful isn't just the romance, it's the choice. Every day, you and I make choices between what's expected of us and what truly drives us, maybe not with swords and longships, but with jobs, families, identities. The Viking world didn't allow much room for such choices, but love didn't ask for permission. It simply arrived. It whispered. It tempted, and it tested. And when tested, even the strongest warriors sometimes bent, not out of weakness, but because they finally realized who they were fighting for. And when passions couldn't be buried, well, sometimes the fallout wasn't just pain, it was triangles, and triangles always cut the deepest. In Viking sagas, love rarely came simple. It came tangled, like the seaweed around a shipwreck, like runes scratched too deep. Love triangles weren't romantic games. They were powder kegs, and when they exploded, blood answered. Imagine 2 rival brothers, Eric and Bjorn, both chasing the same woman, Thyra, daughter of a warrior priestess. She kissed one in spring, the other in summer come autumn. Both wanted to claim her hand, but she chose neither, vanishing before her wedding. When her body washed ashore weeks later, the brothers turned on each other. That's how a blood feud began, and a village burned for it. These weren't just affairs of the heart, they were matters of pride, lineage, and land. To lose a woman meant losing face, and for warriors, honor was everything. Many of these feuds outlived the lovers themselves. One romantic betrayal could ripple across 3 generations. Some families carved names of their enemies into oak beams, letting them rot as a curse. Some feuds became so infamous they were outlawed by the Thing, Viking legal assemblies. But the law couldn't stop the fury of love scorned. A single shared look could mean someone wouldn't come home that night. Now, if you're thinking this is all just ancient drama, think again. Every era has its love triangles, and they're just as volatile today. They spark between best friends, co-workers, cousins. Maybe the battlefield has changed from axe fights to Instagram stories, but the heat, still the same. Ever been caught between loyalty to a friend and attraction to someone they love? That's the ghost of Viking feuds, living in your veins. Even now, people are forced to choose, protect the bond, or follow the pull. And when they choose wrong, it can still cost them everything. In Viking culture, if a man's honor was tarnished by betrayal, he could challenge his rival in the holmgang, a duel, to first blood or death. Today, You won't find that on a dating app, thank Odin, but the emotional stakes remain. The fear of being humiliated, the rage of being second choice, the ache of being loved by the wrong one, and all of it spiraling until someone decides enough is enough. Some love triangles were settled by steel, others were left open wounds, scarring entire clans. But in the next tales, it wasn't the triangle that caused the storm. It was when a Viking took a woman captive and fell harder than he ever expected. She was meant to be a prize, a spoil of war, nothing more than a foreign body chained to a fate she didn't choose. But sometimes, the line between captor and captivated blurred. Viking men, hardened by raids in the sea, found themselves staring too long at the fire-lit eyes of the women they took, like when Jorund, son of a famed raider, brought home a Saxon noblewoman named Elswythe. She spat at him on the ship, tried to escape. He should have killed her, but he didn't. And before the first frost, she sat beside him at feasts, and he hadn't touched another woman since. Now, was it love or obsession? The sagas don't always say. These stories walk a knife's edge between passion and possession. What started as dominance often twisted into longing. Many captured women were defiant, clever, wild with grief and rage, and that fire became irresistible. Viking men weren't used to women who challenged them, who matched them in wit, and so these women, even in chains, became queens in their captors' eyes. Not all by choice, not all in peace, but some saw power in that strange reversal and took it, made it theirs. Still, these liaisons never came without cost. Clan elders often disapproved. Marrying a captured woman, especially one from Christian lands, was seen as weakness, even shame. The law might not forbid it, but tradition did, and sometimes the woman's people came looking. Whole raids were planned to retrieve a single daughter. Love turned into siege, and yet these stories survived. Some couples fled across the sea, building new lives in Iceland or Vinland. Others died together, and a few, they carved their names into runestones, etched proof that even war could birth something tender. It's a complicated legacy, isn't it? Not all love is clean, and the truth is, we still see this dynamic today in refugee stories, in cross-cultural marriages, born of trauma and survival. These relationships ask hard questions. What does consent look like in power imbalance? What does love mean when it begins in captivity? And yet some of those Viking unions endured. Some even became legends, not because they began beautifully, but because they ended with something real, something neither chains nor blood could deny. And across the fjords, far from raids and glory, some Viking women fell into forbidden passion of their own with the quietest of enemies. They weren't supposed to look at each other, let alone touch. He wore robes, not armor. He prayed to a god who forbade desire. She, daughter of Thor's blood, raised among warriors and seers, should have seen him as weak, but something about the silence in him, the way he met her gaze without fear, only depth, unraveled her. Freydis, a shield maiden who laughed at death, found herself drawn to brother Aidan, an Irish monk captured during a raid. She brought him food in secret, at first out of pity, then curiosity, then something else she didn't dare name. Christian monks were supposed to resist temptation. Chastity wasn't a choice, it was their chain. But what happens when the heart pulls against centuries of scripture? Some monks converted under pressure, yes, but others stayed true. They kept their faith, even as their souls wrestled with desire. For the Norse women, these men were foreign and strange, yes, but also kind, in ways Viking men rarely were. They spoke in psalms and poetry, they wept during prayer, they listened, and sometimes listening was more seductive than touch. The very distance between their worlds became intoxicating. These forbidden loves weren't built on lust alone. They were meetings of two cultures at war: Norse passion, Christian restraint, pagan fire, sacred silence. When a shield maiden kissed a monk, it wasn't just a kiss, it was defiance of gods on both sides. And when they were discovered, the punishments were brutal. Women were accused of adultery, sorcery, or worse, defiling the clan's spirit. Monks were sometimes killed outright, seen as infiltrators. But still, these affairs happened, carved into the margins of sagas, hinted at in confessionals, echoed in rune stones, where Latin script meets runic prayer. And isn't that a story we still recognize? Falling for someone who believes differently, worships differently, lives differently. Today it's interfaith marriages or cross-cultural relationships. It's the challenge of loving someone who reflects your soul, but not your tradition. Back then, it meant risking death. Now, it might just mean hard conversations with family, but the core truth remains. Sometimes love shows up in the last place you're supposed to look, and when it does, you have to choose fear or fire, because sometimes that fire leaps again, this time between Vikings and the fiercest of their enemies, the Celts. They met on bloodied ground, her kin's fields soaked in red, his axe still warm. She was Celtic, proud and defiant, daughter of a chieftain slain in the raid. He was Norse, raised on tales of conquest and victory, enemies by birth, bound by war. But in the stillness after the clash, something shifted. Maybe it was the way she didn't beg, or the way he didn't boast. Einar the Viking should have seen Niamh as spoils of war. Instead, he saw her eyes, bright as stormlight, and felt his oath to Odin quake. That's how the gods' rules begin to unravel. These weren't starry-eyed tales. They were raw and risky. Vikings and Celts were locked in violent dance for centuries. Each raid, each retaliatory strike, a declaration of hatred. To love the enemy was to betray your people, and yet some did, in secret glens, in ruined chapels, in caves carved by sea wind. Some Viking warriors took Celtic women, not by force, but by promise. Others were taken themselves, nursed back to life by women who should have slit their throats, and in those stolen moments, love bloomed, not because it was safe, but because it defied everything. Clans didn't forgive easily. If such a love was discovered, it could mean death, not just for the couple, but for anyone who protected them. A Celtic woman found with a Norseman might be declared cursed. A Viking caught consorting with the heathen enemy risked exile or being sacrificed to restore clan honor. But some lovers vanished into the forests, started new clans, or sailed far west to lands where no one knew their names. Their children often carried both cultures in their blood, and sometimes both gods in their heart, and those children became bridges or battlegrounds. These stories remind us that some of the fiercest loves come from the fiercest oppositions, and even now, don't we still see it? Relationships forged across lines of race, politics, borders, ideology. You're not supposed to love them, the world whispers, but the heart doesn't know rules. It knows rhythm, and sometimes that rhythm beats in sync with the very person you were taught to hate. Forbidden love has always had a cost, but maybe that's what makes it unforgettable. Maybe that's why people still risk everything for it. And when that love crossed not only enemy lines, but class lines between jarls and thralls, the price was no less steep. In the Viking world, class wasn't just a social marker. It was carved into your skin, your speech, your spine. A jarl ruled, a thrall obeyed. That was the law, that was the rhythm. And yet, the heart has never cared much for rank. There are whispers of Freya, daughter of a jarl, who fell in love with Brander, a thrall born of Irish blood. He tended her family's stables, smelled of horse sweat and pine, and had eyes that burned like dusk. She would brush past him, just close enough to feel him breathe, and in those fleeting seconds, whole sagas were born. To love beneath your class was to spit on your bloodline. Jarls were expected to marry for alliance, not affection. A jarl's daughter, who fell for a thrall, risked losing everything: inheritance, name, freedom, and the thrall. He could be killed for the mere presumption. Still, these dangerous romances unfolded behind longhouse doors and in barn shadows. Some jarls freed their lovers quietly, disguising love as manumission. Others fought the system outright, challenging the laws that chained their hearts. A few even married in secret, daring the gods and the clans to intervene. But society didn't stay silent. Rumors flew faster than ravens. A jarl who took a former thrall as wife might find his status threatened. He could be mocked at the thing, his authority challenged by rivals. And the couple, they might be exiled, or worse, used as an excuse for clan war. But still, these stories persisted, carved in saga and song. Love that transcended class became proof that the gods didn't always care about station, only the truth between two souls. And maybe, just maybe, such love was a kind of sorcery, all its own. Isn't that something we still wrestle with? Think about it. How many modern relationships are shaped or strangled by wealth, status, or background? The clothes we wear, the schools we attend, the zip codes we live in. It's just a modern echo of jarls and thralls. And just like then, some people still dare to reach beyond what society says they deserve. Not because they're naive, but because they know that real connection doesn't care about class. It only cares about courage. And speaking of courage, some women took it to the extreme, disguising themselves as men just to sail beside the one they loved. She bound her chest with linen, cut her hair with a hunting knife, and stole her brother's cloak. That's how Ingrid, daughter of a chieftain, became Ingvar, the deckhand, all to follow the man she loved across the sea. Her lover, Eric, thought she was back home, safe and proper. But love doesn't sit quietly, not for Viking women, not for shield maidens born with fire in their hearts. And so, she joined his crew, slept among warriors, hid her truth with grit and silence, until a storm hit, and she bled in ways no man could. That's when secrets spilled like seawater. Viking voyages weren't made for women. They were brutal, violent, and holy all at once. Sacred to Odin, feared by men. But love laughs at danger, and some women, unwilling to be left behind, crafted whole new identities to be with their lovers. Some were discovered and cast overboard. Others proved themselves in battle, blade to blade, earning the respect of their crewmates. And a few, they reached distant shores, side by side with the men they loved, their stories passed on in whispers, half sagas, always with a wink, because the best secrets leave just enough smoke behind. These were no helpless maidens. They navigated stars, spoke with seers, killed when needed, and they did it all while hiding their womanhood in a world where being female meant being forbidden. Love gave them purpose, yes, but also power. And in that power was transformation. It wasn't just about being with their man. It was about proving that love could be just as fierce as any sword. Some of these women were never unmasked. Others revealed themselves only when they had something to say, often with the sharp edge of truth. Modern times still echo with this same fire. Women still disguise themselves, maybe not in tunics and cloaks, but in boardrooms, in sports, in spaces where they've been told they don't belong, all to stand beside the people, passions, or purposes they love. It's not just romantic, it's revolutionary, because love like that doesn't follow the path. It makes one with every hidden glance, every shared danger. These women didn't just chase their lovers, they helped carve the legend, and sometimes that legend grew so large it toppled more than expectations. It shattered alliances. In the Viking world, alliances were lifelines. A marriage could mean peace between rival clans, a pact sealed in mead and steel. But what happens when one heart decides to love outside the terms of a truce? That's when alliances crumble like old stone. Take the case of Sigrid, promised to a jarl's heir in a political match, but who fell instead for his cousin. Not just any cousin, but the son of a disgraced uncle. Their affair, hidden beneath feast halls and temple shadows, exploded when Sigrid was found pregnant. The wedding was called off. The alliance collapsed. Within a month, 2 villages were at war. These affairs weren't simply romantic. They were political weapons. A love affair could be seen as a threat, an act of sabotage, even a declaration of war, and when discovered, the cost wasn't just personal. It meant broken treaties, lost trade routes, dead sons. Clan leaders saw love not as divine, but dangerous. A man who followed his heart instead of his duty could undo years of diplomacy. A woman who gave herself to the wrong bloodline could condemn her kin to slaughter, and yet they did it anyway, because some loves aren't born from reason, they're born from fire, and fire spreads. Some couples thought they could outsmart their fate, plan to escape, elope, lie until it all blew over, it all. It rarely worked. A jealous rival, a loose-tongued servant, or a priestess with second sight always caught wind, and when the truth came out, it didn't just cost the lovers their freedom, it shattered the web of clan politics. Lands were seized, friendships turned into vendettas, oaths, sworn under stars, were broken by the whisper of a kiss, and yet some would say it was worth it, because those stories, the ones that caused the most destruction, also burned brightest in memory. Even now, haven't you seen this? Love disrupting partnerships, friendships, business empires, a single affair turning an empire upside down, modern or medieval. The lesson echoes. Desire, when kept in secret, gathers weight. Eventually, it cracks what it wasn't meant to touch. These Viking affairs weren't careless. They were desperate, passionate, tragic, and unforgettable. Because when you fall for someone you were never meant to touch, the stakes aren't just high, they're lethal. And in some cases, those lethal stakes weren't just exile or shame, but death itself, delivered by Viking law in the name of punishment. In Viking society, love was powerful, but law was absolute, and when love crossed the bounds of marriage vows, the punishment wasn't a slap on the wrist, it was exile, or death, sometimes both. Imagine Solveig, wife of a powerful chieftain, who found herself tangled in moonlit meetings with a skald, young, clever, with a voice like mead. Her husband discovered a runestone charm tucked in her cloak, inscribed with love poetry. The thing met within days. The verdict: she would be stripped, flogged, and banished. The skald, hunted like an animal. Their love turned into a death sentence carved in law. Adultery wasn't just betrayal, it was an attack on bloodlines. Viking families guarded lineage like treasure. If a woman bore a child not of her husband's seed, it could threaten inheritance, status, even the legitimacy of heirs. That's why the laws were brutal. A married woman caught in an affair could be drowned, stoned, or sold into slavery. A man, sometimes fined, sometimes killed, especially if he bedded a chieftain's wife. The law carved no mercy for those who loved outside their vows. But the stories kept happening because passion doesn't bow to statute, and sometimes the law was used strategically. A rival might accuse a powerful woman of adultery simply to strip her of her influence. A jarl could eliminate a political opponent by catching him with the wrong woman. Adultery became more than moral failure. It was a tool, a chess piece, in the power games of the Viking elite, and lovers caught in the middle, they rarely survived. Those who did became wanderers, ghosts, their names blackened in every town they passed. Yet in exile, some lovers carved new lives, freed by the very shame that tried to destroy them. You've seen this echo in history, haven't you? In strict societies today, where a woman's infidelity is a death sentence, while a man's is a trophy, it's not ancient, it's alive. The Viking laws may be gone, but their shadows remain. They remind us how fear, control, and social standing still shape who we're allowed to love. And when people step outside those rules, punishment, whether legal, emotional, or social, often follows. But as these stories show, some souls would rather burn together than live apart under cold laws. And sometimes, those burning souls were queens and shield maidens, mighty women accused of unfaithfulness by men who feared their strength. Powerful Viking women walked a razor's edge. Queens and shield maidens held authority few women in medieval Europe could dream of. They led armies, commanded loyalty, made war and peace But one accusation, just one, of unfaithfulness could undo them completely, like Queen Astrader, whose husband left for trade in the east and returned to Whispers. A servant claimed she was seen embracing her former lover beneath the stone arches of the temple. The king, enraged, called the thing. Astradir stood alone, her voice defiant, but in the eyes of the court, a woman with too much power was always guilty. In Viking culture, female honor wasn't just about chastity, it was tied to legacy, property, and clan pride. A queen accused of adultery could lose her throne. A shield maiden could be stripped of her weapons and her name. The irony, these women were expected to be as fierce as men in battle, but still be meek in love. It was a double standard that cut deep. A male warrior with lovers in every port was admired. A female leader with even a hint of scandal, a threat to be silenced, preferably with shame, or steel sometimes. Accusations were true, and when they were, the consequences were even sharper. Some queens did fall for scalds, warriors, or even slaves. Some shield maidens chose passion over allegiance, but just as often, these women were innocent, used as pawns in political games. A rival could discredit a woman simply by casting doubt on her loyalty. It didn't take proof, just a rumor, a whispered rune, a look held a second too long, and once the tale spread, even the gods seemed to turn their gaze. Sound familiar? Even now, women in power face harsher scrutiny. Leaders are called too emotional, too ambitious, or worse, their private lives dissected in public courts. And in love, they're told to stay quiet, stay proper, stay contained. These Viking tales show us this isn't new. It's ancient, and it's why the stories of shield maidens who stood tall, even under accusation, still strike a chord. They were judged, betrayed, and broken, but not erased. Their names lived on in the sagas, carved by poets, remembered by firelight, and sometimes their stories were tangled with more than politics. They were wrapped in blood, rivalry, and brothers torn apart by the same woman. Brothers in arms, brothers in blood, bound by oath and shield wall. But all it took was her to tear them apart. The sagas are heavy, with stories of sibling love turned to ruin over a woman's touch. Take the tale of Ivar and Stan, sons of a jarl, raised on the same sword lessons, drinking from the same horn. Then came Svala, fierce, clever, wild as the sea. She kissed one at Yule, danced with the other at midsummer. When the snow melted, they both believed she belonged to them, and by the first thunder of spring, one brother was dead. Viking law didn't make room for emotion when it came to inheritance. The eldest often took everything, land, titles, ships, but when love entered the equation, suddenly, power wasn't enough. The younger brother might risk everything for the woman the elder already claimed, and the woman, she wasn't just a prize. Often, she chose one and left ruin in her wake. Sometimes she was blamed for the bloodshed, sometimes worshipped as the flame that revealed the cracks beneath the family honor. Either way, she was never forgotten, because love triangles between brothers never ended clean. These weren't gentle rivalries. They turned into home gangs, duels to the death, or feuds passed down to sons. Mothers wept not just for lost children, but for shattered family lines. And the gods, they were silent or laughing, depending on who you asked. Even now, families fracture over matters of the heart. You've seen it. Siblings refusing to speak for decades over one stolen kiss, one drunken confession. The weapons may have changed, but the wounds haven't. The tragedy is, these weren't bad men. They were men torn by loyalty to blood and the pull of desire. One always tried to step aside, at first, until jealousy curdled, until silence became a scream. And that's what made their sagas endure. Because when brothers war over love, everyone loses. And sometimes, what starts as heartbreak turns into a full-blown legend, retold in song, etched in rune, and burned into the bones of Viking memory. And when the lovers were truly forbidden, when their passion defied every law, every god, and every tribe, It wasn't just brothers who bled, it was history itself that changed. Some love stories are whispered, others, they roar across centuries. The Viking world birthed sagas, not just from war and glory, but from forbidden love so fierce, it became legend. These weren't just tales for entertainment, they were warnings, prayers, anchors. Like the story of Ketil and Brynja, he, a runaway outlaw marked by Norse gods, she, a seer's daughter sworn to the temple. Their union defied clan, law, prophecy, and still, they fled together. No one knows where they died, but on winter nights, skalds still sing of them. Their story became a rune carved into Iceland's oldest stone. When a love story made it into a saga, it meant one thing. It shook the world. The lovers didn't have to survive. They just had to matter. Their affair needed to challenge something big, an alliance, a prophecy, a sacred vow. And if it did, their names were etched into memory with the same weight as kings and conquerors. These stories weren't romanticized fluff. They were raw, wild, drenched in blood and longing. They reminded Viking listeners that love isn't soft. It's dangerous, sacred, worth dying for, and sometimes worth killing for. Many sagas started with a simple spark, a stolen glance across the thing, a hand brushed in the temple grove, a whispered promise beside a ship's hull. But what came next was always chaos. Lovers running through snow with hounds on their heels. Whole clans wiped out in the name of honor. And when it was over, someone, always someone, picked up a harp or a chisel and said, "This must never be forgotten." That's how legends are born. From ash, from ache, from the silence left when the heart chooses passion over peace. Today, we still tell these stories in different ways. Movies, novels, tattoos. We obsess over Romeo and Juliet, over Jack and Rose, over lovers who dared. We crave their pain, their urgency, their tragic beauty. Why? Because deep down, we all want to believe our love matters that much, that it could shape history, that someone might speak our name 100 years from now. With awe, the Viking sagas didn't sugarcoat love, they burned it into bone, and sometimes that burning love was no match for Viking law, where passion met punishment, carved cold into the rules of the land. Viking society might have been wild in war, but when it came to law, it was brutal and deeply structured, especially around sex, marriage, and betrayal. Adultery wasn't just a personal sin, it was a crime against family honor, inheritance, and social order. The Gragas, Iceland's medieval law book, laid it out without flinching. A man caught with another man's wife could be outlawed or even killed. A woman who strayed, flogged, enslaved, or in some cases, executed. Viking laws didn't whisper about infidelity, they roared punishment, and the kicker, these laws weren't always equally applied. If a woman accused her husband of adultery, the consequences were usually mild, maybe a fine, a slap on the wrist. But if a woman was caught with another man, her entire life could collapse. Her children could be declared illegitimate, her dowry seized, her clan shamed. Viking law protected bloodlines fiercely, and adultery put that lineage at risk. And so, justice was swift and cruel, but that didn't stop the affairs. It only made them more dangerous, more secret, more intoxicating. Imagine sneaking across a snowy field in the dead of night, knowing that if you're caught, you don't just lose love, you lose everything. That was the reality for many. The law wasn't abstract, it was real, enforced by things, legal assemblies, clans, and even hired swords. Some lovers fled before the ruling came down. Others begged seers to cast spells to protect them, and a few stood trial, defiantly admitting their passion before the entire village. Rare, bold, and usually doomed, but unforgettable. Even now, we still have cultural laws around love, unspoken codes about who we can love, how we should behave, what's acceptable. Break those, and while no one will throw you into the fjord, hopefully the punishment can still be severe. Gossip, isolation, legal battles, emotional exile. So really, the Viking legal code wasn't about sex. It was about control, about keeping the world in a neat, predictable order, and forbidden love. Well, that was chaos incarnate. And if you think the law was harsh, wait until you hear what happened after judgment was passed and the shaming began. You might think exile was the worst punishment in Viking times, but often it was the shame that did the real damage. Public shaming was a ritual, a performance, a spectacle. When someone was caught in an affair, the community didn't just whisper, they watched. Picture a woman led to the center of the village, with her hair chopped jagged, her gown torn to reveal the runes of her disgrace, or a man paraded with a carved mask nailed to a staff, mocking his betrayal. It wasn't just punishment, it was memory made flesh. These rituals varied by region, but the core was always the same: humiliation, permanence, control. Sometimes they were branded, literally, marked on the face, chest, or forearm. Other times, they were forced to stand nude before the thing, shamed in front of kin and rival alike. The worst, the nithing pole, a cursed staff planted in the ground with runes of insult, a horse skull impaled at its top, facing the shamed one's home. It meant you were cursed by your community. Worse than exile, you were erased, and yet some endured it. Some stood tall in their shame, refusing to apologize, because even shame, when carried with defiance, becomes legend. A few of the most powerful sagas begin after the shaming, where the disgraced lovers escape, rebuild, and rise again. But most broke under it because Viking culture was communal. You weren't an individual. You were your family, your name, your honor, and when that cracked, everything else followed. The shame didn't end with you. It stained your bloodline for generations. Today, we don't call them nithing polls. We call them viral posts, cancel culture, whisper networks. But the mechanics are the same. When someone breaks the social contract, whether in love, marriage, or status, they're often cast into a spotlight meant to scald. Some survive it, some don't. But Viking history reminds us, public judgment is rarely about justice. It's about spectacle, and fear, and control, and love. Love almost never gets a fair trial, and when love crossed too far, when it defied not only law, but honor itself, it could lead to something darker than shame. It could lead to blood. In the Viking world, some sins couldn't be forgiven, not by gods, not by law, and not by blood. When a forbidden love brought shame to a family, an honor killing was often seen not as murder, but as restoration, the act of cleansing the bloodline. Imagine a daughter caught with a rival clan's son. Her brothers drag her from the longhouse at dawn. Her father doesn't look her in the eyes. She knows what's coming, and still, she doesn't beg, because in some twisted way, she's still choosing love, even if it ends in a blade beneath the ribs. It didn't always fall on the woman. Men were also killed, especially if they seduced a married woman or touched a jarl's daughter without permission. But women bore the brunt. Why? Because lineage passed through them. Their wombs were seen as vaults for bloodlines, and if that vault was contaminated, there was no undoing it. So families acted quickly, violently. To let her live was to risk generations of shame. A father might weep as he sharpened the blade. A brother might vomit after the act. But still, they did it because the clan came before the soul. These weren't just crimes. They were rituals. Some bodies were left outside the village as a message. Others were quietly buried in unmarked graves, their names never spoken again. And yet, some were remembered because grief has a way of whispering the truth behind the silence. Some mothers carved symbols into stone. Some lovers returned, years later, to find the place where their beloved had died and lit a fire in their name. That's how forbidden love lived on, not in the open, but in the cracks. Even now, the echoes remain. Honor killings still exist in parts of the world where family reputation outweighs personal freedom. We like to believe we've moved beyond such things, but shame, control, and fear still take lives, sometimes metaphorically, sometimes for real, and always the heart of it is the same. Someone loved in a way they weren't supposed to. Someone refused to apologize for their fire. And those who survived, they faced the full fury of judgment. But sometimes, just sometimes, they ran. In the Viking world, strength was praised, but silence was expected from women. When it came to forbidden love or adultery, the scales of justice were anything but balanced. A man caught in an affair, he might pay a fine, maybe take a few bruises, but a woman, she could lose everything: her name, her home, her freedom, even her life. Picture a young woman named Thora, caught kissing a married skald in the woods. He claimed she seduced him. She denied nothing. He was lashed, then sent home. She was shaved, branded, and sold to a distant farm as a concubine. It wasn't just about punishment, it was about power. Women were seen as vessels of legacy. So when one stepped outside her role, the backlash was savage. The worst irony: shield maidens could lead armies, queens could rule kingdoms. But if they chose love outside their station, or vows, all that power meant nothing. The expectations were twisted: be strong in war, but obedient in love. A woman who dared to follow her heart without permission was punished harder than any sword could strike. Even the stories, those legendary sagas, passed from firelight to parchment, often twisted the narrative. Men were painted as tragic lovers, caught in fate's cruel game. Women, temptresses, witches, disgraces. They were blamed not just for their own downfall, but for the ruin of men around them. And yet, some of these women became icons, their pain etched into poems, their names whispered with reverence, because even when broken, they were never silent. Their love, however forbidden, left an echo. This imbalance isn't ancient history, it's modern reality. Even now, women are shamed more harshly than men for the same choices. Think about how media spins stories. He's a romantic, she's a homewrecker, he made a mistake, she ruined everything. These echoes of the Viking double standard still shape how we talk about love, desire, and dignity. But the old stories remind us some women endured it all and still held on to their truth, and some didn't endure. They escaped with nothing but a heartbeat and the one person who was worth leaving the world behind for. Sometimes, when the weight of clan, law, and shame grew too heavy, lovers didn't bow. They ran into forests, across seas, away from the gods, the judgments, and the graves, already dug for them. These weren't just runaways. They were dreamers with blades. Take Leif and Yrsa. He, the son of a warrior chieftain. She, a former priestess accused of sorcery. Their love was forbidden by blood feud and law alike. But one frost-covered dawn, they vanished with nothing but a long ship, a goat, and a single carved rune. Frelsey, freedom. Leaving a clan wasn't just hard, it was sacrilege. Your name was your currency. Your bloodline was your armor. When you turned your back on it, you became nothing, a nothing, no home, no protection. And yet, lovers did it. Some settled in wild lands, Greenland, Iceland, far-flung coasts untouched by war. Others lived as outlaws, surviving on stolen bread and stolen moments. Few found peace, fewer found glory, but they found each other, and sometimes that was enough. These stories weren't written into official law codes. They were whispered into lullabies. They showed that love didn't always win, but it fought, and in some rare cases, it won in ways the world never expected. Children born in secret who went on to found their own clans, lost lovers, returning as legends, villages where people said they died in the sea, when really they lived beyond the reach of old grudges, beyond the rules, free. Even now, this theme strikes a chord. People still leave families, religions, traditions, countries. For love, they leave behind wealth, comfort, status, and most terrifying of all, identity. Not because it's easy, but because it's real. When the soul finds something it cannot deny, everything else becomes negotiable. These Viking lovers remind us the price of freedom is high, but for some, the cost of staying was higher, and sometimes the force driving them wasn't just love, It was something older, something divine, something whispered by the gods themselves. Vikings didn't just believe in love. They believed the gods felt it, fought for it, and fell to it. The stories of Freya and Loki weren't just divine myths, they were mirrors. Freya, the goddess of love, beauty, and war, wept golden tears for the lover she lost. Her story echoed in every shield maiden who waited by the fjord for a man who never returned. And Loki, trickster, shapeshifter, seducer, his wild, rule-breaking romances whispered to every soul who ever dared to love someone they weren't supposed to. When Viking lovers were warned their match would bring shame or ruin, some would say even Freya chose sorrow for love that gave them courage or madness. Often both. Many secret romances leaned into the gods for protection, offerings left at sacred groves, small altars hidden in the woods, a lock of hair, a carved amulet, all asking the gods to look kindly on a love not blessed by men, because if the gods themselves defied the rules, why couldn't mortals? Some even believed their love was fated, blessed by the divine, that if Freyja or Loki touched their hearts, nothing else mattered. These couples would seek out seers, asking whether the gods had joined their fates together. Some got answers, others got riddles, a few got cursed, but they followed the thread anyway, because Viking love wasn't about safety, it was about sacrifice, and no one understood sacrifice like the gods. Even today, we echo these myths. We fall in love with rebels, dreamers, wild hearts, drawn by forces we don't fully understand. The Norse gods weren't saints. They were flawed, fierce, full of feeling, just like us, and their stories gave Viking lovers permission to feel more deeply, to break, to choose desire over duty, to suffer beautifully, and sometimes to enchant the one they loved, not with words, but with spells and runes, older than memory itself. Love in the Viking Age wasn't just a feeling, it was a force, and some believed it could be summoned. The practice of cedar, a form of Norse magic, was often used to influence desire, bend fate, and even bind hearts. A woman might pluck strands of hair, mix them with herbs and blood, whisper the name of her beloved 3 times under the moon, and bury the charm beneath his bed. Was it sorcery? Was it love? In the Norse world, the line blurred, and that made it dangerous. Cedar was mostly practiced by women, especially Volur, seeresses, witches, priestesses, but some men, desperate and reckless, dared to use it too. To cast a love spell was to risk shame, even death, if discovered. Because the Viking code valued strength and clarity, not manipulation, but desire, doesn't care about rules, and when someone loved fiercely and feared losing, it wasn't uncommon to turn to magic, charms woven into belts, words carved into drinking horns, incantations whispered into firelit halls, all for love. But cider came with a price. A spell miscast could backfire. There are sagas of men cursed with madness for rejecting enchanted lovers, and women driven into exile when their charms were discovered. Sometimes, what began as a love magic became obsession. A spell could inflame desire, but not truth, and not all who tried it understood the consequences. One woman burned a sacred rune backwards and condemned her lover to die in his sleep. She joined him not long after. The saga says it was the gods who ended it, or maybe it was just grief. Today, love spells still exist in pop culture, in spiritual shops, in whispered TikTok trends. People light candles, wear enchanted jewelry, follow old rituals. Why? Because love still terrifies us. It makes us reach beyond logic into mystery, just like the Vikings did. Whether or not the magic works doesn't matter. What matters is that someone was willing to believe, to try to say, I want this so much, I'll call upon forces beyond myself. But the wisest among the Vikings, they didn't trust only magic. They turned to those who could see ahead and warn them of what love might cost. The seer didn't speak loudly. She never had to. One word from her, one quiet rune cast into the fire, and everything could change. Viking lovers, especially those tangled in forbidden bonds, often sought the guidance of Volur, the wise women who walked between worlds. Some came for blessing, others for truth, but many came hoping not to hear what they already knew in their bones. This love will ruin you, and when the seer confirmed it, they had to choose walk away or dive in, eyes wide, heart first, into the storm. Seers didn't predict like we imagine. They didn't say, "This will happen." They said, "This may happen if you continue." That was enough. A woman once asked a vulva if she should follow the man she loved, even though he was promised to another. The vulva tossed her bones, traced her fingers in ash, and replied, "You will be loved in life and mourned in death." The woman went anyway. Months later, she was found beside him, both struck down by his jealous betrothed. A tragic end. But still, their names were sung in saga. Warnings from seers weren't always heeded, and that's the point. Prophecy didn't exist to stop people. It existed to test them. How badly do you want this love? Are you willing to sacrifice clan, name, safety, even your future? The seer didn't stop you. She just handed you the truth, like a sharpened blade. What you did with it, that was your saga. Some turned back. Others carved new paths through fate itself, but none walked away unchanged. In our world today, we don't call them seers. We call them therapists, friends, ancestors in our dreams, people who look at our love and say, "Be careful." And still, we don't always listen, because some hearts would rather burn than wonder what if. And isn't that the most Viking choice of all? Not the safe one, the real one, the one that etches your name into someone else's memory. And sometimes, those names weren't just remembered, they were carved into stone. Runes weren't just for names and victories, they were for heartbreak too. Across Scandinavia, runestones stand silent in the grass, some weathered smooth by time, others still sharp, with the names of lovers who defied the world. For Aslaug, whom I loved more than honor, one stone reads, "No mention of title, no clan name, just love, laid bare." These weren't public boasts. They were quiet rebellions. Last words from those who knew their passion would outlive their punishment, and maybe even their bloodline. Most runestones told of battles, ships, and gods. But now and then, you find one that hints at more. A woman's name, listed without a father or husband, a rarity and a clue. A stone raised in sorrow, a symbol of Freya carved next to the serpent of Jormungandr, meaning love that clashed with the natural order. It didn't need to spell it out. Those who read the runes knew what it meant. This was no ordinary tale. This was forbidden, and someone risked everything to remember it. The sagas, too, are littered with these love stories, disguised in legend, wrapped in metaphor. A warrior who fled with a priestess, a thrall who died beside his jarl's daughter, a queen whose grave was dug beside the man she was never allowed to marry. These stories weren't always told proudly, but they were told, passed from mouth to mouth, embroidered into cloaks, scratched into bone, not because the culture approved, but because the heart remembered. Always. Think about that. In a world where one wrong touch could cost your life, some still loved so fiercely they made it impossible to forget. Even today, we visit graves, hold old letters, reread texts we shouldn't. Memory becomes a shrine. We do what the Vikings did. We mark love where it mattered, in songs, in stones, in silence, even when we're not supposed to. And those stories, they didn't just stay in the fjords, they rippled outward, shaping how the entire medieval world began to tell stories about passion, rebellion, and impossible love. When the Vikings sailed into foreign lands, they didn't just bring axes, they brought stories, and not just of conquest and gods, but of forbidden love, tales that blurred lines between loyalty and longing, blood and desire. These sagas spread with the raiders, traders, and settlers. Monks who once feared Norse still began copying their legends onto vellum. Court poets in France and Saxon minstrels began weaving Norse-style tragedy into their own songs. Suddenly, European love stories weren't just about courtship. They were about clan duty verse, passion, betrayal, exile, and tragic choices. Think about it. Tristan and Isolde, Lancelot and Guinevere, even Romeo and Juliet, echoes of the Viking saga style. Lovers caught in political traps, queens accused, warriors haunted by kisses they should never have taken. It wasn't coincidence. The raw, unflinching emotion of Viking storytelling had bled into the mainstream through runestones, oral poems, and captured monks turned scribes. Norse themes reshaped the idea of romance itself. Love was no longer a quiet virtue, it was a force capable of toppling kingdoms. The medieval world loved its structure: kings on thrones, women in castles, God above all. But Viking tales laughed at that. They told of queens who ran with slaves, seers who loved outlaws, and lovers who fled across oceans rather than be separated. This chaos, this fire, it was irresistible, and it gave European writers permission to push boundaries. Suddenly, love could be painful, scandalous, divine, and in that tension, greatness was born. Even today we feel it. Every time we root for the enemies, the lover's arc, the girl who runs away with the wrong guy, the runaway bride, the passionate affair that defies society. That's the Norse blood beating in modern storytelling. The saga doesn't end with the last page. It evolves, it whispers, and it dares us to remember that the best stories, the ones we return to, are the ones that hurt a little, because love, when it's real, rarely plays by the rules. And that truth is older than any law, any king, any sword. So now you know, the Vikings didn't just raid and rule. They loved with wild, reckless, breathtaking intensity. They risked exile, shame, curses, and even death just to touch the one their heart chose. And though the laws were brutal, though the gods themselves seemed to warn against it, they still chose love. But what about you? What would you sacrifice for love that defies your world? Would you risk reputation for truth? Would you follow your heart, even if it led you into exile? These aren't just ancient tales. They're mirrors. They reflect your choices, your fears, your longings. So here's the challenge. Don't just read these stories. Live with that same fire. Choose love that matters, even if it's hard, even if it costs you. And if these stories stirred something deep inside you, subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications because the saga isn't over. More secrets, more power, more passion from Viking times and beyond are waiting. You don't want to miss what comes next.